A freezing river, a helpless wolf pup, and a man who made a choice that would change both their lives forever. Jack Callahan thought he was saving a stranded animal, but what happened next was something he never expected. This is a story of survival, trust, and an unbreakable bond between man and beast. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications for more incredible stories like this one. Jack Callahan had always felt at home in the Alaskan wilderness. For years, he had lived in solitude, tending to his remote cabin and embracing the raw, untamed beauty of nature. He loved the quiet, the crisp air, and the endless snow-covered landscape, stretching far beyond the horizon. But on that freezing afternoon, silence was broken by something unexpected. A sharp, desperate yelp echoed through the trees, sending a chill down Jack's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He had spent years out here. He knew every sound the forest made. And this was pure distress. His sharp eyes scanned the landscape. Nothing. Then a flicker of movement near the river caught his attention. His breath hitched. A small figure was struggling in the icy water, its tiny paws flailing, barely able to keep itself above the current. A wolf pup. Jack's heart pounded. The river was dangerously cold. Anything caught in it for too long wouldn't survive. He had no time to think. Without hesitation, he ripped off his coat and boots and sprinted toward the water's edge. The second his body hit the river, the cold punched the air from his lungs. Every nerve screamed in protest, but he pushed forward. The pup let out another weak cry before its head dipped under the water. No, no, no! Jack surged forward, stretching his arm as far as he could. His fingers brushed wet fur. With one final effort, he grabbed the pup by the scruff of its neck and hauled it to his chest. It was barely moving. Fighting against the current, Jack kicked his legs hard, forcing his way back toward the shore. His muscles burned, his breaths were ragged, but he refused to let go. Finally, his feet found solid ground, and he stumbled onto the snowy bank, collapsing onto his back, with the pup still clutched against him. The little wolf was shaking violently, its fur soaked and matted. Jack could feel its tiny heart racing. It was barely breathing. "You're okay, little guy," Jack murmured, carefully wrapping his coat around the fragile body. The pup didn't fight, just lay limp in his arms, exhausted. Jack exhaled sharply. If he left it here, it wouldn't make it through the night. He had two choices: walk away and let nature take its course, or bring it back to the cabin and hope he wasn't making a huge mistake. The pup let out a weak whimper, nuzzling against the warmth of his chest. Jack sighed. Guess that settles it. Without another word, he tightened his grip on the small creature and trudged toward his cabin, unaware that this single act of kindness would change his life forever. Jack pushed open the heavy wooden door of his cabin, a gust of warm air hitting his frozen skin as he stepped inside. He kicked the door shut with his boot, his arm still wrapped tightly around the trembling pup. The poor thing was barely conscious, its small body shivering violently despite being wrapped in his coat. Moving quickly, Jack knelt by the fireplace, tossing in another log before grabbing a thick woolen blanket. He unwrapped the pup from his coat, placing it gently onto the warm fabric. The tiny creature let out a weak whimper, its golden eyes flickering open just for a second before closing again. Jack frowned. That wasn't a good sign. The pup was soaked to the bone, its breathing shallow. It had lost too much heat. If he didn't act fast, it wouldn't make it. "Come on, little guy, stay with me," he muttered. He grabbed a clean towel from a nearby chair and began rubbing the pup's fur, trying to stimulate blood flow. Its ears twitched slightly, but it remained limp. Jack's jaw tightened. This wasn't just any animal. This was a wolf, a wild predator. If it survived, would it turn on him? Instincts told him to be cautious, but something deeper, something he couldn't quite explain, urged him to keep going. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pup stirred. A faint, barely audible whimper escaped its lips. Its small chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, but it was breathing. Jack exhaled in relief. "That's it. You're tough, huh?" he said softly. The pup's eyes opened again, meeting Jack's gaze for the first time. There was something there, something beyond instinct. Fear, yes, but also something that almost resembled trust. Jack sat back, running a hand through his damp hair. He had no idea what he was doing. He wasn't a vet. He wasn't even sure how to take care of a wolf, but he couldn't just throw it back out into the cold. For now, he'd let it rest. He grabbed an old flannel shirt, folded it into a makeshift bed, and placed the pup on it near the fire. The little wolf curled into itself, its tiny frame still shaking, but no longer on the brink of death. Jack leaned against the wall, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. He had come out here to escape people, to live a life of solitude. Now, he wasn't alone anymore. As the night stretched on, the wind howled outside, rattling the cabin walls. Jack drifted into a light sleep in his chair, his rifle propped up next to him, just in case. But before exhaustion fully took over, one last thought crossed his mind. What if this pup wasn't alone? Jack woke with a start. A deep, guttural howl echoed through the darkness outside the cabin, sending a shiver down his spine. He sat up, his instincts immediately alert. His eyes flickered to the pup curled up near the fire. It was still asleep, its tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Jack reached for his rifle, his mind racing. That howl, it wasn't distant. It was close, too close. He stood and moved cautiously toward the window, careful not to make a sound. The glass was fogged from the warmth inside, but he could still make out the faint outline of the snowy forest beyond. The moon cast a pale glow over the trees, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, movement. A shadow between the trees. Jack's grip on the rifle tightened. His breath came slow and steady as he watched the figure emerge from the darkness. A wolf. But not just any wolf. This one was massive, its thick gray fur dusted with snow, its eyes glowing like molten gold in the moonlight. The mother. Jack exhaled through his nose. He had expected this. A pup this young wouldn't be alone. And now, its mother had come looking for it. The wolf took a few cautious steps closer to the cabin, her ears perked, nostrils flaring as she caught the scent of her missing pup. Jack could see the tension in her body, the way her muscles coiled, ready to strike if necessary. He had two choices. He could open the door, try to return the pup, but if the mother saw him as a threat, she wouldn't hesitate to attack. Or he could wait, hope she left. But wolves were persistent, especially when it came to their young. She wouldn't just give up. Jack glanced back at the pup, still peacefully curled in the flannel bed he had made. Would it even survive if he put it back out there? It was still weak, still vulnerable. Another low growl rumbled from outside. The mother was growing impatient. Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't want a fight, but he also wasn't about to throw a defenseless pup back into the freezing cold, not after he had fought to save it. He took a slow step back from the window. If the mother wanted her pup, she would have to come and get it. The night stretched on, the tension thick in the air. Jack sat near the fire, rifle resting across his lap, ears trained on every sound outside. Then, just before dawn, the howling stopped. Jack stood and moved to the window again. The clearing was empty, no sign of the mother wolf. He frowned. Had she given up? No, that didn't make sense. A pit formed in his stomach. Something didn't feel right, and he was about to find out why. Dawn crept over the horizon, casting a soft golden light over the snow-covered landscape. Jack had barely slept. His mind kept replaying the events of the night. The mother wolf's presence, her sudden departure. Something wasn't right. He stood from his chair, stretching his stiff muscles. The pup was still nestled in its flannel bed by the fire, its breathing steadier now, its fur drying. It had survived the night, but it was still weak. Jack moved to the window, scanning the tree line. The mother had been out there, watching, waiting, but she hadn't tried to break in, hadn't howled again. Why? A deep unease settled in Jack's gut. Wolves didn't abandon their young unless something forced them to. Grabbing his coat, he moved toward the door and cracked it open. The cold morning air rushed in, biting at his skin. He stepped outside, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes trained on the forest. The snow was disturbed near the tree line. Large paw prints circled the area where the mother had stood the night before, but there was something else. Jack crouched down, brushing a gloved hand over the snow. Tracks. But not wolf tracks. These were deeper, heavier, claw marks dug into the frozen ground. A predator. Jack's pulse quickened. He recognized these tracks. A mountain lion. That explained why the mother wolf had left so suddenly. She had sensed the threat. She had been forced to abandon her pup to protect herself. Jack's jaw clenched. He had seen mountain lions in the area before, but they rarely came this close to his cabin. Something must have driven it here. Maybe hunger, maybe desperation. He scanned the tree line again. Nothing moved, but he knew better than to trust the stillness. Slowly, he rose to his feet and backed toward the cabin, keeping his rifle at the ready. Once inside, he bolted the door and exhaled. He turned to the pup, still sleeping soundly. It had no idea how close danger had come. Jack ran a hand over his face. This changed things. He had assumed the mother wolf would return, that he would have to decide whether to give the pup back or let nature take its course. But now, if that mountain lion was still out there, this pup wouldn't survive long in the wild. Jack looked down at the small creature, its tiny ears twitching in its sleep. He wasn't planning on keeping it. He had never wanted company, human or otherwise. But fate had dropped this wolf into his hands. And Jack Callahan wasn't the kind of man to walk away from a fight. The air outside had changed. Jack felt it in his bones. The eerie silence, the unnatural stillness in the trees. The mountain lion was still out there, waiting. Inside the cabin, the pup stirred in its sleep, letting out a soft whimper. Jack glanced down at it, his jaw tightening. It was still weak, still vulnerable. And now, more than ever, it needed protection. Jack moved to the window again, scanning the tree line. The tracks he had seen earlier were fresh. The predator was circling, biding its time. A smart hunter. Jack knew how mountain lions worked. They were patient. They stalked their prey for hours, sometimes days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Jack had just given it a reason to linger. The pup. His grip tightened around his rifle. He had to make a decision. Either he sat in this cabin, waiting for an attack, or he took control of the situation. He chose the latter. Jack moved quickly, pulling on his coat and boots. He grabbed a small pack of supplies, extra ammunition, a hunting knife, and a flashlight. He wasn't going to let a predator dictate his next move. He was going after it first. With one last glance at the pup, still curled near the fire, Jack slipped out into the cold morning air. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he moved through the trees, his rifle raised, every sense alert. The mountain lion had to be nearby. The tracks were still fresh, leading deeper into the forest. Jack followed them, his breath coming in slow, steady puffs. Then, movement. A flicker of shadow between the trees. Jack froze. His heart pounded as he scanned the dense woods. And then he saw it, a pair of golden eyes staring back at him. The mountain lion crouched low, muscles coiled like a loaded spring. It was massive, its sleek body blending almost seamlessly into the snow-covered brush. It wasn't running. It wasn't hiding. It was hunting. Jack raised his rifle, finger poised over the trigger. He had faced wild animals before, but this was different. The lion wasn't just looking for food. It was looking for something easy, something weak. The pup. Jack squared his shoulders. Not today, he muttered. The lion let out a low, guttural growl, its tail twitching. Jack knew what was coming. A charge. He had one shot. His finger pressed against the trigger, but just as he was about to fire, something unexpected happened. A second growl, low but fierce. Jack's pulse jumped. It wasn't coming from the lion. It was behind him. His stomach twisted as he turned his head slightly, just enough to see a small, trembling figure standing in the snow. The wolf pup. It had followed him. Jack's blood ran cold. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears. The wolf pup stood just behind him, its tiny frame barely able to hold itself up in the thick snow. Yet, despite its weakness, it let out another small but determined growl. The mountain lion shifted its gaze, its golden eyes flickering between Jack and the pup. Damn it. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle. This wasn't just about him anymore. He could handle a fight, but the pup wouldn't survive if the lion attacked. The big cat crouched lower, its muscles tensing. It was going to strike. Jack had one shot, one chance. His breath slowed, his finger curled around the trigger. Then, out of nowhere, a blur of gray. Jack barely had time to register the movement before a massive shape launched itself from the trees. The mother wolf. She hit the mountain lion with full force, knocking it off balance. A ferocious snarl ripped through the air as the two predators tumbled into the snow, teeth flashing, claws tearing. Jack didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, taking careful aim, but he didn't fire. The wolf was holding her own. She was protecting her pup. Jack stepped back, keeping his eyes locked on the fight. The lion swiped a massive paw, but the mother was faster, dodging and clamping her powerful jaws around its shoulder. The big cat yowled in pain and scrambled backward. Jack saw the hesitation in its eyes. The lion had lost the element of surprise. And now, it was outnumbered. With a final, frustrated snarl, the mountain lion turned and bolted into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. Silence fell over the forest. Jack exhaled sharply, lowering his rifle. His heart was still hammering in his chest, but it was over. The mother wolf stood panting, her fur bristling, her eyes locked onto Jack. Then she turned her gaze to the pup. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the pup let out a soft, almost questioning whimper. Jack watched as the mother wolf took a slow step forward, then another. Finally, she reached her pup and lowered her nose, gently nudging it. The pup whined, weak but alive. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. He had spent the last 24 hours fighting to save this little creature, and now its true protector had returned. He swallowed hard. This was the right thing to do. The pup belonged with its mother, but why did it feel so damn hard to let go? The mother wolf lifted her head, her golden eyes meeting Jack's once more. There was no aggression, no fear, just understanding. A silent thank you. Jack gave a small nod. Take care of him. The mother turned, gently picking up her pup by the scruff of its neck. Jack watched as she padded back into the trees, her small child safe in her grasp. Within moments they were gone, swallowed by the wilderness. The wind howled through the forest, but Jack barely felt it. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. Not really. With a final glance at the tree line, Jack turned back toward his cabin. And though he had come here seeking solitude, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, a part of him now ran with the wolves. If this story touched your heart, remember, acts of kindness, even toward the wild, can change everything. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share the story with someone who believes in the unbreakable bond between man and nature.